Looking for trouble, 3 motorcyclists strolled into the Shadow Creek, Arizona, Johnson's gas station. Instead, they came across a Navy SEAL. The events that followed would demolish a corrupt police force, topple a global cartel, and reveal a $100 million drug trafficking organization. A lone woman riding a sports cycle was their target, they believed. They instead chose to engage in combat with one of the most lethal veterans in U.S. military history. The Desert Wolves motorbike gang was about to learn a hard lesson about superficial appearances from Captain Laura Morrison, a former operator with Navy SEAL Team 6. I was wondering where you're viewing from today before we return to the topic. Be sure to subscribe if you're like these stories. Tomorrow's special episode is one you won't want to miss. Laura Morrison pulled into Johnson's gas station on her Kawasaki Ninja as the afternoon sun glimmered off Highway 87. Far out, red rock formations cast lengthy shadows over the desert valley. Working in special operations for 15 years had taught her to meticulously record every detail. There were a couple of rusted pickup trucks outside the shop, an inoperable security camera, and various routes leading to the old petrol pumps. Decades of practice crumbled. As Laura got off the horse, Joe Johnson, the station owner, observed from the shop window. The way she moved, positioning herself to be visible to everyone approaching, registered with his weathered face. Having served for 20 years as a pararescueman in the Air Force, he was able to identify a fellow operator. Laura delicately repositioned her leather jacket, taking care to hide the seal trident tattoo that adorned her forearm. Her most recent expedition had left her with a lingering sense of terror. The covert Guatemalan mission that had gone wrong. She was unable to rescue her teammates. Without anticipating Shadow Creek to transform into much more than a gas station, she had opted for this secluded path to calm her mind. As she stepped into the station, the bell began to ring. Johnson, who usually looks curious, nodded respectfully from behind the counter. Remotely located, ma'am. Laura picked out a coffee cup and said, just passing through. A reminder of the close quarters fighting she endured in Kandahar, her right hand bore a scar that her fingers reflexively stroked. The tranquility was abruptly broken as 3 motorbikes smashed into the parking lot, their engines intentionally set to a level that rattled the windows of the store. It was the arrival of the Desert Wolves. The gang's emblem, a wolf's head with blood-red eyes, was displayed on their leather cuts. The boots of Marcus Blade Rodriguez's lieutenants sank into the aged linoleum as they were escorted into the store. As he took in his surroundings, his damaged face contorted into a smile that he likely believed was endearing. He looked at Laura for an awkwardly long time before shifting his attention to Johnson. Blade summoned an elderly guy with a raspy voice that seemed to chill the room. Your absence from the Business Association meeting last month has been noted by Sheriff Cooper. Your dedication to the community worries him. As Johnson placed a coffee pot on the table, his hands quivered ever so slightly. Blade, I've been occupied with inventory. It is as you are aware. Absolutely, Blade said, drawing nearer. Meetings called by the sheriff are not, in fact, optional. As Shadow Creek expands, new things are on the horizon. It is essential that everyone takes part. Laura remained calmly observing the interaction, her coffee slipping her mind. With drill-like accuracy, she recorded details. The towering Fong was armed with a blade stashed in his boot. They called the towering man of muscle, Tank, and he was hiding a weapon under his cut. The chemical odor that lingered on their clothing and the new track marks on Fong's arms were the most essential things that she noticed. Protective funds weren't the only issue. Perhaps the sheriff should stop doing errands for thugs and concentrate on real law enforcement, Johnson continued, his voice now louder. Silence fell over the store. Blade's false grin faded away. Old man, what were you saying to me just now? Johnson was already flanked by Fong and Tank, but Laura was already on the move. Her 15 years of practice finally paid off as she seized Blade's wrist and pressed down on the clusters of nerves that caused his finger to spasm open. He told Laura, in a low voice that echoed through the empty store, that the sheriff need to execute his duties. Blade struggled to free himself, but Laura's hold remained unyielding. While the rest of the motorcyclists instinctively went for their firearms, they halted in their tracks at her subsequent remarks. "Not me. You seem inexperienced, and your draws are painfully slow. This will be completed by the time you clear the leather." Blade sneered at the person who was causing him difficulties. Laura flashed a smile, but it remained elusive. "Surprisingly, yes. Rodriguez, Marcus Blade, was discharged dishonorably from the Marine Corps in 2009. You have recently advanced to larger operations, although the Desert Wolves have been operating protection rackets throughout 3 counties. Fong didn't cook the meth with those chemical burns on his hands. The old copper mine is actually carrying something far bigger." The expression on Blade's face became lifeless. Laura's hold on Blade's wrist tightened, causing Tank to gasp, as his hand moved toward his weapon. She went on to explain what happens after this. "Get out of here, you and your pals. Either we move on from this incident or we determine the maximum number of bones I can break before you fall to the ground. The decision is yours." No one moved for a considerable amount of time. Blade waved his free hand as a sign of submission. "This is far from finished, but all right, we're departing." Laura let him go and stepped back to make room for them to go. "Sure, it's possible. It's totally your call." 3 motorcyclists retreated. Blade cradled his wrist, ruining their attempt at a frightening appearance. He fired one final glance out the window as they got on their bikes. "Can you tell me who I am?" As the motorbike sped off, Johnson said something. Sitting down again, Laura took a drink of her iced coffee. "No more than a person who has witnessed a lifetime's worth of bullies." Laura realized Blade was correct about one thing as she watched the Desert Wolves fade into the desert heat. That wasn't the end. Just now, she had herself marked as an easy target. If her gut was telling her the truth, the chemical evidence and cartel ties suggested a far larger plot than mere intimidation by biker gangs. The Desert Wolves were only the beginning. The corruption of Shadow Creek reached far into the surrounding red sandstone. Johnson set a new mug of coffee down on the table for her. The former PJ was resolute, no matter what happened next. "You have company." With her thoughts already racing through possible outcomes, Laura gave a subtle nod. Sometimes peace had to be battled for, but she had chosen this path hoping for peace. The Desert Wolves were about to find out why Navy SEALs were the last individuals you wanted as opponents, if a battle was indeed what they desired. While silently observing the distant flash of hot lightning, Laura quietly agreed. "There is someone else here who can relate." This is no longer the case. As the sun began to set, Laura Morrison sat in the back office of Johnson's gas station, meticulously cleaning her Glock 19. Her thoughts raced back to the encounter with the Desert Wolves as she meticulously examined every detail. Coordination of their actions, the mention of the copper mine, the chemical burns on Fong's hands, all of these were unexpected pieces of the puzzle that she had found at Shadow Creek. A sudden rap on the door jolted her out of her reverie. "Joe, it's available." A woman in her 30s, dressed like a deputy but without her badge visible, followed Johnson inside. As she shut the door behind her, Deputy Sarah Martinez had a somber expression. Martinez refused to sit down and said that word gets around quickly in small towns. "I heard you were in a conversation with Blade and his lads. Joe and yourself are now fair game because of what you did." Putting her weapon back together, Laura persisted. His protection rackets were really a front for their true intentions, which were to harm him. "I understand," Martinez said, removing a thumb drive. Following strange shipments through the abandoned copper mine. Far too regimented for the Desert Wolves, multiple vehicles, expert security, timed like military operations. The drive was placed into Johnson's antiquated computer by Laura. She felt her blood turn cold at the sight of the convoy patterns and guard rotations shown on the satellite picture. Modified shipping containers for the purpose of transporting humans. Laura whispered that they are transporting individuals through this area. People are being trafficked under the guise of drug activities. Johnson clenched his fists. Near the mine, Sheriff Cooper must be aware that half of the department is on routine patrol. Martinez's squabble was bought and paid for by Cooper, the mayor, and half of the city council. Someone who becomes overly interested tends to vanish, and I've been constructing a case for months. Amanda researched Martinez. Explain to me why you're showing this to me. Reason being, I saw how you dealt with Blade. You stand out. Veteran with, if I had to speculate, a background in special operations. Above all else, you have no ties to anybody in this place. They won't be able to take advantage of any vulnerability spots. Engines rumbled in the dark desert as a string of headlights raced past the station. Laura stepped over to the window and watched as 3 dark-windowed SUVs, all black in color, slowly circled the area. They're already keeping tabs, she saw. Not biker gang strength, but professional surveillance. Then Martinez gave a little nod. Blade definitely made a few calls. So, are you planning to stay or go? A secure number Laura hadn't seen in months sent a message that made Laura's phone vibrate. Lots of high-value targets and significant cartel activity at Shadow Creek as seen on satellite. Just utter the word, and our ghost squad will be there. Mike, everything was starting to fit together. For something on a global scale, the Desert Wolves were merely local muscle. The cavern networks surrounding Shadow Creek were ideal for transferring goods and persons across the boundary. Rebecca made up her mind to remain. On the other hand, we are quite good at this. Martinez, please provide me with all of the information you have regarding Cooper and the local business. This town's history is familiar to you, Joe. I must be aware of every possible detour, cave entrance, and location they could be employing. Johnson forewarned that they will pursue you. Professionals will be dispatched once they determine that you pose a threat. As she double-checked her weapon one more time, Laura grinned icy. Great, I'll let them in. But first, we must consult an eyewitness who can see everything happening in this town. The villagers may be tight-lipped with the cops, but they'll spill the beans to the servers. That made Martinez's eyes widen. At Maria's diner, she's known everyone's name because she's been there for 40 years. Afterwards, let's stop by Maria's place, Laura texted Mike and answered. Reserve crew ready for recon mission. Something exciting is about to happen in Shadow Creek. Just as they were about to leave, Laura glanced in the office window and saw her reflection. Her aspiration to become a silent warrior would have to be postponed. Her former self, the operative who specialized in bloodthirstily destroying criminal empires, was desperately needed by Shadow Creek. As they left the station, the desert night got darker, but Laura remained focused. The first step was easy. Collect information, form alliances, and give the impression that the opponent is in charge. They would soon find out the consequences of taking their cartel operation to the wrong town. Headlights piercing the night like a predator's eyes, additional vehicles were approaching the copper mine in the distance. They mistook her for a potential hunter. They were completely unaware that they were about to be preyed upon. It took us a long time to prepare and tell this narrative. So, please subscribe to our channel if you're enjoying it. We really appreciate it. We will return to the story now. The neon sign of Maria's Diner, located in the middle of Shadow Creek, emitted a crimson light that illuminated the almost deserted parking lot. Laura pointed to the operational security cameras surrounding the entrance and positioned her motorcycle so that she could see both exits clearly. While Johnson positioned himself near the rear entrance, Martinez hid her unmarked vehicle in the shadows. Right as Laura stepped inside, the bell rang. Just 2 clients, both sporting Desert Wolf cuts and a too casual attitude, were seated at the booths at this hour. The owner, Maria Ramirez, who had silver hair, glanced up from behind the counter. Rather than recognizing Laura, her expression was one of recognition for what she stood for. Coffee? Absolutely. As Maria poured herself a cup, she inquired. Top choice in Shadow Creek. As she sat onto a stool, Laura positioned herself to observe the motorcyclists reflected in the mirror situated behind the counter. I have heard that you are also quite skilled in the art of making apple pie. By the grace of God, Maria's grandma is the only pie maker in the world, she said with a trembling voice. However, client activity has been modest as of late. The regulars are becoming scared off by all the newcomers. The motorcyclists got to their feet and pretended to leave money on the table. As they departed, one purposefully rubbed up against Laura in an attempt to frighten her. Instead of turning around, she kept walking. Maria changed her attitude the second their motorbike sped off. You may have some questions regarding the recent changes to our small community, therefore Deputy Martinez contacted ahead of time to let you know. Laura took a few slow, leisurely tastes of her coffee. I thought it was great. Please describe the mine to me. It had been deserted 3 months prior. After then, a new investment firm began using the desert wolves as security. All night long, traffic is now a problem. Transportation vehicles, luxury SUVs, freight containers. An industry that necessitates a large number of watchmen. Now that his badge was visible, Martinez joined them. Maria, what is the depth? So profound that last month, the daughter of my cousin Rose vanished. The police stated that she fled the scene. Nonetheless, I beheld her hop into one of those black SUVs. They have resorted to the age-old methods of smuggling. The ones that win their way through these rolling hills. Something jolted Laura's phone. Mike has something to say. Multiple heat signatures, a confirmed tunnel network, a rotating team of professional security guards, and cartel patterns that mirror Gulf operations, all confirmed by satellite. Laura wondered whether they were transporting goods north. Hide from drones used by border patrols in the caves. However, local infrastructure was necessary. An authoritative figure. Martinez and Cooper both spat. In his past, he had solid police work. Afterwards, his sibling became entangled with the canines. At this point, half of the force is either employed or too afraid to protest. In Laura's path, Maria set a pie piece. I overheard Blade on the phone with someone 2 days ago. Prepare for an epic event. Extra security measures are being put in place while they clear the old warehouse sector. The surgeon was summoned to examine the procedure, as previously stated. Laura froze. The doctor who operated. A name that had been mentioned in Guatemala. That mission that was a failure. Her teammates lost their lives because of that. Someone who enforces cartel rules and is notorious for punishing those who get in the way of activities. On what date? A span of 3 days. That evening, a town meeting will be held. Every business owner is required to be present. Martinez bent over. Cover is flawless. Be still while they hide whatever they don't want anyone to see. Laura's thoughts were racing as she mapped out possible outcomes. Maria, I require the tunnel system's blueprints. Authentic mining survey reports. Regardless of what displays access points. A mining engineer was my late husband. Some ancient maps may be stashed away somewhere. Their earpieces cracked at the sound of Johnson's voice. There are a number of cars coming. Development becomes a professional. Bikes and SUVs. Over to the window, Laura stepped. Riders atop desert wolves guided 4 black SUVs as they chugged down Main Street. The leading car came to a halt in front of the restaurant. Are the old Prohibition tunnels still connected to your rear chamber, Maria? The elderly lady grinned. Behind the storage shelves, there are doors. The church basement is accessible via tunnels located 3 blocks east. Martinez, please expel Maria. I will make them notice it. Her weapon was examined by Laura. "Joe, we will be having guests soon." Johnson said it was just like the old days. Consistent tone from the prior PJ. Laura chewed on her pie once more as Martinez and Maria disappeared. It was truly outstanding. As hefty boots padded into the restaurant, the bell rang. You were warned that this was far from over. Through the deserted chamber, Blade's voice resounded. "Hey, boss wants to chat." Laura remained still. "Someone from your boss can schedule a meeting." "I'm almost done with my pie." New footfalls were heard. Operators who are certified by their movements. War contractors, not cartel forces. Things were going to heat up soon. "No need to ask, ma'am." A contractor stood up and talked. "I must own, though, you're a stone." Even in their own town, few people dare to confront the ferocious desert wolves. With icy enjoyment, Laura shifted her gaze to watch them. No longer is this wolf territory. The inhabitants of Shadow Creek are the rightful owners of the creek. Everything you are is a parasite that hasn't figured out that it's dying just yet. Blade gave the order to take her. Laura grinned. Giving the opponent the impression that they were in control was sometimes the first step in a successful operation. While the contractors advanced, she meticulously plotted out the optimal angles, locations, and pressure points to achieve maximum harm with minimum exertion. Now is the moment to prove to them that Navy SEALs were the ultimate predators in any setting, even a sleepy little cafe. The initial contractor failed to anticipate the arrival of the coffee pot. With a smooth move, Laura let it go, instantly causing a conflagration of boiling liquid and shattered glass. She had already begun to move as he stumbled backwards. Prolonged instruction in close-quarters warfare taking precedence. As he reached for his concealed weapon, the second contractor was sent tumbling into Blade by an arm that was caught in a joint manipulation. The third one messed up by giving up a broad punch. Taking advantage of his forward momentum, Laura managed to get inside his guard and push him into a booth. As if water were a river, she mocked them with the idea of professional security. Like mall cops, you move around. Two additional contractors stormed in the back entrance. These individuals brazenly display their weaponry. As the air was thick with the scent of cordite and the sound of shattering coffee cups and pie displays, Laura rushed behind the counter to escape the onslaught of bullets. "You're sucked in," Blade yelled. "Only we can save the day." From her jacket, Laura removed a tiny gadget that had been a gift from her days on the Ghost team. "True," she said, "you're the ones in a bit of a jam." She activated the mechanism. The diner went dark when all of the lights went out in a burst of sparks. As expected, the tactical light of the contractor turned on. They were easy prey in the dark. Laura sneaked up behind them, moving stealthily. The first contractor was knocked out with a pinpoint hit to the spinal cord. Even as the second one spun and fired furiously, she had already departed. Before the third could even realize she was there, he was rendered senseless and disarmed. With a knife drawn, Blade turned back toward the door. "Excuse me, but who are you?" Laura stated, her voice echoing through the shadows, that there is someone who has dealt with cartel puppets better than you. Not Cooper, but the true boss. You must inform him that Shadow Creek is no longer his playground. Blade growled as she continued to search for her, threatening that the surgeon would dismember her. Operators are nothing new to him. Laura's demeanor became tough. "I have first-hand knowledge of Guatemala." She smacked him with 3 pinpoint blows that sent Blade sprawling to the floor, gasping for air, before he could react. In the midst of distant police sirens, she pulled out her phone and took pictures of the contractors' identification cards. Their links might be tracked by Mike. Her earphone picked up crackles from Johnson's speech. "Cooper is personally guiding the local police as they approach. Clear for Maria and Martinez. Martinez is organizing with her reliable subordinates while she is safe at the church." Laura looked over the napping contractors. "It is time to vanish." I will meet you at the Alpha backup location. As the screeching of Cooper's vehicles filled the parking lot, she quietly made her way into the back room. The spot where Maria had indicated the entrance to the tunnel was precise. Decades of dust have obscured its existence from the uninitiated. Pulling the concealed door shut, Laura could make out Cooper's irate voice from above. Locate her, I desire the whole seclusion of this town. Though tiny, the tunnel may be traversed. The smuggling network of Shadow Creek during the Prohibition era was obviously involved. With her thoughts already analyzing the night's intelligence, Laura crept stealthily into the shadows. Everything changed when the surgeon was about to arrive. Recognizing her, he would be aware of her abilities. Mike called her again, her phone vibrated. Noticeable activity at the mine as seen by satellite. Operations are being expedited. Reserve squad poised and ready. Still in the works, she said. Permit them to believe they are in charge. Setting the board will take me 48 hours. Just like it had been said, the tunnel came out in the church basement. Martinez and Maria had put out old plans across a table, and Johnson was waiting with them. According to Martinez, Cooper's convened an emergency council meeting. It has scared them. Blade was instructed not to interact directly, particularly in the presence of contractors. They should not have shown their hand so soon. The blueprints were inspected by Laura. All around town, there existed a vast network of tunnels that linked various structures. Ideal for coordinating the movement of goods or setting up a counter-operation. I require comprehensive information regarding this town meeting, Maria. Everything, security, attendance, etc. Apologies for the confusion, but the elder woman actually nodded. Using the old community center, which has one main room and 2 exits, they are mandating that all company owners be present. In Laura's mind, it will serve as a disguise. While they transfer someone or something large through the tunnels, make sure everyone stays put. Johnson mentioned that Laura herself mapped out paths via the tunnel system as the surgeon arrived to examine his investment. Next, we will make sure to welcome you in style. Martinez, I want to know how many of the sheriff's deputies you trust. 4 or 5. Prepare them, but do it in silence. For the time being, we'll let Cooper believe he's in charge. Hardness set in Laura's eyes. The reason why a town protected by a seal is not a good place for cartel operations will become clear to them in 3 days. Police cars scoured the streets of Shadow Creek outside, looking for a specter. However, Laura Morrison was already plotting the operation that would root out the cartels from Shadow Creek in the church basement, surrounded by allies and intelligence. The surgeon, known for his mastery of fear and pain, was on his way. Darkness in the desert, though, would reveal more than just small-town prey. A predator who had taken a page out of Guatemala's playbook and was now a sport hunter after learning his lesson would be waiting for him. From her vantage point in the church bell tower, Laura watched as dawn stole over the red cliffs of Shadow Creek. She observed Cooper's deputies setting up roadblocks on main roadways with her powerful binoculars. They were careless with their positioning, which exposed several possible approaches. Lack of expertise. More activity at the copper mine was shown by Mike's satellite imagery, which her phone displayed. Armed guards patrolled in regimented lines, and trucks entered and exited with military precision. Those were no wolves from the desert. Their every action betrayed their expert training. How many aims are there? From the rooftop of his station, Johnson could be heard speaking into her earpiece. 30 plus at the quarry, Laura said. Combining contractors with cartel security, they are strengthening strategic sites in anticipation of potential conflict. Martinez accompanied her to the tower, where he brought new information. In the last 30 days, my deputies have verified 3 further cases of someone going missing. Under Cooper's direction, the police misplaced the reports of all the young women. A clench formed in Laura's jaw. Same as in Guatemala, human trafficking. Humans were the surgeon's specialty when it came to dissecting and commercializing them. She had discovered the remains of his victims and witnessed his work up close. Old mining tunnels are being utilized. Spreading out updated maps, Martinez continued. There are several discrete exits spread out across 3 counties. Laura investigated the network of tunnels. All of these paths meet at this point. A room in the middle was her indication. Poisoned by nature. Maria said, the main storage area, as she made her way up the tower steps. The largest cave in the system, according to my spouse, who dubbed it the cathedral. There they are being held. Laura's strategic brain analyzed the data. We require first-hand information regarding security systems, guard rotations, and eyes inside. Maria grinned, her problem solved. Just 2 days ago, my nephew began working as a maintenance worker at the mine. Cooper has no idea he is a member of my family. How quickly will he be able to provide us with the details? His shift is in the evening tonight. Laura's vibrating phone rang. Mike once more. At the restaurant, facial recognition verified the identities of 3 ex-Spec Ops contractors. Alumni of Blackwater, major participants. Laura thought as she got ready for the surgeon to arrive that they are bringing in additional muscle. By the way, Maria, how is the town meeting coming along? Attendance is confirmed as mandatory. As a show of power, they have stationed armed guards at each gate. Martinez bent over. The moment you strike is just right, because they'll be distracted. No, Laura said. They will anticipate that. We should be more astute. At the tunnel plans, she gestured. These former paths, which were prohibited, pass beneath the community center. A nod from Maria indicated agreement. Connected to half the basements in town. My spouse recorded every one of them. After that, we turn their strategies back on them. As they keep an eye on the streets, we'll take control of the subway. Laura activated her radio. Hey Joe, how's the status of our equipment cache? Received the equipment you wanted? Evening vision, tactical communications, allegations of breaching. It seems like your pal Mike has quite the network. Laura cracked a little smile to herself. Every time, the ghost team showed up with supplies. Martinez, inform your reliable deputy staff. Detailed operational plans only. Maria, please inform me as soon as you receive information on your nephew. We need to get everything ready to welcome the surgeon within the next 48 hours. As they made their way toward the mine, a group of black SUVs drove into town. Use her binoculars, Laura followed their every move, making mental notes of faces, weapons, and patterns. Those people weren't only security firms. They were as agile as experts in clandestine operations. Martinez noticed that they are becoming anxious. For such a little place, all this firepower. Laura said in a distant tone that they ought to be anxious. They are still in the dark as to why. Another message from Mike sounded on her vibrating phone. Positioned as a ghost squad. Pronounce the word, perimeter surveillance is up and running. Her response was to keep an eye on things only. Here, we excel. They won't realize our presence until the last possible moment. Further cars drew nearer to Shadow Creek in the distance. As they prepared for a siege, the opposition was amassing their forces and strengthening their positions, but they were fighting the wrong kind of battle. As Laura put aside her binoculars, she remarked that they believe stature and power determine victory in combat. But whoever masters the darkness will triumph in this setting and against this kind of adversary. Turning to her friends, she spoke. It is time to demonstrate to them why the Navy SEALs are experts in underwater operations, as that is the domain of the most dangerous animals. Laura Morrison started turning the sleepy desert village into a complex trap as soon as light fully broke over Shadow Creek. Never in his wildest dreams did the surgeon know that he was about to encounter an ambush that had been simmering for 30 years in the field of special operations. An impending storm was brewing. A tidal wave of corruption would soon wash across Shadow Creek when it broke over the creek. After it ended, the cartels would know better when deciding which territories to claim. Shadow Creek's bedrock was carved into an intricate network of passages, which Laura could see in the darkness of the tunnel system thanks to her night vision. Details about guard rotations, security systems, and, most crucially, the confirmation of 23 captives housed in the cathedral were provided by Carlos, Maria's nephew. Shoo, Laura murmured to herself in her tactical calm, 3 main guard posts, with motion detectors covering main roads and surveillance cameras at important intersections. As Carlos spoke from his concealed spot close to the mine entrance, he clarified that this did not apply to the maintenance shafts. They feel nobody can utilize them because of how narrow they are. Grimacing, Laura grinned. More congested areas have been a part of the SEAL training, where the control boxes for the sensors are conveniently located. Everything is being managed through a closed network at Junction B7 and the primary security office. The communicator recorded Martinez's voice as a crackle. Laura, there's been some action at the top. Trio of more SUVs have just driven into town. Contrary to the contractor's pattern. Laura observed heat signatures, which were disciplined and professional, but exhibited a noticeable aggressiveness, as they moved through the tunnels above using her thermal sight. Before the surgeon comes, the cartel wet work teams get everything cleaned up. Inaudibly, her phone jangled. Mike's most recent report. A pair of convicted cartel killers have been identified by facial recognition technology. They are cleaners, not normal security. Laura pressed the button on her communicator. Separation is maintained by all units. Assume for a moment that they are below ground. She changed the channel. Joe, what's the deal with the church basement? According to Johnson, the equipment is ready. What sets the Ghost crew apart is their equipment. As if my worn-out pajamas were brand new toys. Maria, can you confirm the exact number of tunnel access points? 17 are verified. From her temporary command post in the church, the eatery owner replied. Connections are present in the majority of Prohibition-era structures. You can access the basement of the community center in 3 different ways. While mentally outlining the tunnel system, Laura crept stealthily through the shadows. When the time came, every intersection and corridor would be interconnected in a complex labyrinth that would separate and isolate cartel forces. She detected additional motion with her thermal scope. The main tunnel is being accompanied by a pack of desert wolves. The individual strode confidently as he or she examined the operation's security measures. Laura murmured about the new player. A tall, burly man is carrying out a security assessment. According to Carlos, that's Victor. This ex-Spetsnaz has been here since yesterday, improving security standards, and he is the surgeon's advance man. A clench formed in Laura's jaw. Prior to this, she had come across Victor's work. In Guatemala, he had served as the chief of security for the surgeon. Because of his skill in counter-surveillance, the mission that went awry and killed her companions was compromised. Obtaining more readings, she mentioned. Consistent with Carlos's tally of hostages, the cathedral exhibited many heat signatures. Martinez's voice exhibited restrained fury. They are holding our folks. Ladies and gentlemen, citizens of this town. Laura assured him that it would not be for long. I require specific directions to the control room, Carlos. Although Victor will have altered security procedures, he will be unable to alter the tunnel's design. Another message from Mike popped up on Laura's phone as Carlos sent the data. Planned arrival in 36 hours by the surgeon's private jet. Across 3 states, a spectral squad is following the actions of a secondary cartel. Compared to Shadow Creek, this is much larger. According to Laura, it concludes here. Gather your crew together. Everything needs to be hit at the same time when we move. Changing back to the primary channel, she continued. Collaborate with your deputy, Martinez. When we give the signal, I want to see prearranged car collisions that will jam major roadways. Maria, inform the reliable company proprietors. They must evacuate the streets as soon as gunfire breaks out. According to Maria, it is already done. Nothing will be open except my diner. Ideal vantage point for the community center's observation deck. Laura started to stealthily make her way down the tunnels, making note of potential charging locations that could alter the course of this subterranean battleground. Even though Victor was a master of security operations and among the greatest in the field, he was gearing up for an all-out attack. A shadow war, with an adversary that could emerge out of nowhere, strike without provocation, and then disappear again, was too much for him to handle. He was unprepared for a SEAL that was still functioning in her natural habitat, underwater and underground, in places where conventional military doctrine was irrelevant. "They're burying themselves," Laura whispered. "They are unaware of it at this time." Subterranean, Shadow Creek went about its business as usual, but above ground, plans were afoot to launch an operation that would cut the cartel's human trafficking network in half. He had invited the surgeon to come and examine his realm. To his surprise, he would instead come across a hunting site that had been meticulously prepared by an experienced predator. There would be zero wiggle room, zero leniency, and zero compromise this time. The infernal struggle for the very essence of Shadow Creek was about to commence. As Laura finished the operation plans in the church basement, the rocks of Shadow Creek were dyed blood crimson by sunset. The cartel's regional movements were followed via satellite imagery from Mike, which covered one wall. Another set of tunnel plans included patrol routes and sensor placements. The third wall bore images of the missing, the faces of the daughters from Shadow Creek whose family believed they would never lay eyes on them again. Carlos reported via radio that Victor had stepped up his patrols. Teams of 4 alternate every 30 minutes. Every time, they take a different path. The patterns of patrol that Martinez's deputies had recorded were reviewed by Laura. Great job. Unpredictable gaps, unpredictable rotations, and overlapping fire fields. Cryptically, she grinned. However, his mindset remains that of the Spetsnaz, engaged in the final conflict. Mike had sent her critical information, and her phone beeped. As the surgeon's plane took off from Cartel Airfield, a number of escort cars continued north. Cooper has ordered all units to clear main roadways, according to the Shadow Creek police scanner. While meticulously cleaning guns, Johnson inquired about the time frame. Laura said 6 hours. Before daybreak, they will want them down there. Maria, how is the community center doing? Wolf packs in the desert are establishing checkpoints. It appears to be the usual security measures for a town meeting, complete with metal detectors and armed guards. New information was brought in by Martinez when he entered. Cooper wants a show of power when the surgeon comes, so he's summoned in every deputy, even the ones who aren't on his payroll. As she studied the enemy's plans, Laura gave a subtle nod. In anticipation of danger from the outside, they are erecting a security bubble with many layers that all point outward. Now that we're inside, Johnson chimed in, having figured out her plan. The 3D tunnel projection that Mike's team had created was activated by Laura. The outer perimeter was strengthened by fortifying 3 defensive rings. The police roadblocks were her focus of emphasis. Separate layers of protection around the church and the mining entrance. Martinez made the astute observation that all those resources were devoted to warding off outside dangers, while leaving them exposed from within. Laura was quite exact as she loaded new magazines. Victor is competent, nonetheless, he is fighting in a conventional manner, creating rigid boundaries and open fields of fire. He's getting ready to attack. Unfortunately, Maria quickly clarified, that is not what we are providing them with. No, Laura's tone became more grave. They're going to die 1,000 cuts from the anarchy and confusion we're bringing them. She set her tactical communicator to active. Ghost, where are you at the moment? Position, the murmured response came. Mobile teams stationed at all key nodes, waiting for your signal to activate them. Her gaze shifted to her companions. Last orders, Martinez, your deputies remain in reserve until gunfire erupts. As soon as it does, close off all exits from the town. Johnson, when it comes to perimeter control, you'll be coordinating with Ghost Team. Once it starts, nobody gets out. Your diner is open all day, Maria. The community center has to be watched. Carlos, stay hidden in the mine. We must be informed as soon as the detainees are relocated. Her watch was examined by her. I have 5 hours to wait until the surgeon lands. The town meeting is 6 hours away. Her phone rang urgently once that began. Mike had a short message. Issue resolved, surgeon redirected flight to private airfield, expected landing time, 2 hours. Everything is being sped up by them. Laura's thoughts redirected in an instant, and she recalculated. Due to a change in planning, the time frame is now being accelerated. Then she reached for her kit bag. Now is the time to put your people in place, Martinez. Maria, Carlos, keep an eye on things. Run Operation Undertow, everyone else. In half an hour, we will be relocated. The time is limited, Johnson cautioned. Laura responded as she double-checked her weapons for the last time. They're getting nervous. Because he feels something is amiss, Victor is rushing the schedule. Very well. Messes are made by anxious people. She took one final look at the portraits on the wall. Women whose families had given up hope and went missing. In 3 hours, the cartel will find out why a town guarded by America's top troops is not a good place to conduct business. As darkness descended around Shadow Creek, the streets were devoid of sound, yet unseen forces were assembling beneath the surface. In a mad dash to check over his procedure, the surgeon arrived early. On the contrary, he would stumble into a trap, a culmination of 30 years of training in special operations. Never forget, Laura reminded her squad, that our struggle is for every little town they've attacked and every family they've broken up, not only Shadow Creek. We will demonstrate tonight why Navy SEALs are the ultimate predators in any setting. Disappearing into the shadows that would serve as her hunting field, she made her way to the tunnel entrance. A peaceful moment had passed before the onslaught. The clandestine conflict at Shadow Creek would soon commence. Additionally, a SEAL was ready to show the cartels why they should have been more selective with their territorial selection deep beneath the town in the desert. As 2 dark SUVs drew near the private airfield at Shadow Creek, darkness descended upon the desert. Laura observed the security detail under Victor's personal supervision using thermal optics. 20 contractors are around the landing zone in a protective ring. Out of the starry heavens, the surgeon's Gulf Stream dipped. Keep all units silent on the radio. Quietly, Laura spoke to her. Just follow my instructions. Ghost Squad operators followed targets from concealed locations. Along potential exits, Martinez's deputies waited in partially dismantled vehicles. From his vantage point at the mine entrance, Johnson kept an eye on everything. In the stillness of the desert night, the private plane gently landed, its engines easing down. More heat signatures were seen to be emerging from concealed locations, according to Laura's thermal scope. From the mine, Carlos reported that Cooper's crooked deputies were nervously forming a secondary security ring. Sending the package is now in order. The prisoners are being readied for transportation. A clench formed in Laura's jaw. Transferring them via the main tunnel to the cathedral first will take 20 minutes. The pilot's door sprang open. A towering, sophisticated figure dressed in a pricey suit emerged, and Laura panned in on it. In Guatemala, she had witnessed the surgeon's work, but she had never seen his face. She was still troubled by the memory of locating her companions. The primary objective was verified, she murmured. Operation Undertow is about to begin, so everyone, get ready. Their professional relationship was evident in the surgeon's greeting to Victor, which she observed as being based on mutual respect and a healthy dose of dread. In his police SUV, Cooper arrived, exaggerating his importance too much. Unfortunately, Mike's last piece of information was a vibrating phone. 3 waves of cartel reinforcements are approaching. There will be no room for error with those heavy weaponry. All right, Laura responded. Streamlined access to more targets. A convoy led by the surgeon started making its way toward town. The lead is held by Cooper's vehicle. Laura pressed the button on her communicator. How is the package coming along, Carlos? Off we go, with 23 hostages and an armed escort. Begin Phase 1, Ghost Team. At the same time, charges that were concealed across Shadow Creek went off. Sections of town were plunged into darkness as power transformers detonated in a precisely orchestrated sequence. As expected, the mine's emergency generators sprang into action. What on earth? The police band could barely make out Cooper's voice. Transport the units to the power plants. Even Laura's smile was icy. Their reaction was predictable, they were dispersing their forces. Next, carry out the plan. Shadow fighters shifted in the caverns under Shadow Creek. A spectral team operator emerged from the shadows as the first cartel guard quietly passed away. Prior to his demise, the second had the opportunity to utter a half-breath of surprise. According to Carlos, there was contact at Junction 7. The package is being redirected. In the maintenance shafts, Laura was already making her way, following the captive's path. If an opponent tried to fight their way in, Victor was ready for them. Operators who had already entered his security zone were too much for him to handle. A number of cars were getting close to the town limits, Martinez said. Visible are heavy weaponry. Laura told them to come. Additional goals for the 3rd stage. At the mouth of the mine was the surgeon's convoy. As the cartel boss emerged, Laura observed through the cameras that Carlos had set up. The contrast between his pricey suit and the arid setting was stark. Status is not good. The sound of the surgeon's refined voice resounded over the surveillance channels. This place is under danger. Get everything moved tonight and burn the rest. Laura's heart sank. Burn the remainder was a term she was familiar with. It was their intention to get rid of any witnesses. All units are to carry out Phase 3 immediately, she ordered. Pandemonium broke out throughout Shadow Creek. Electronic equipment that disrupts power systems rendered cartel vehicles inoperable. There were designated areas where people may be killed. Rolling roadblocks were set up by Martinez's deputies to cut off escape routes. The operators of the Phantom Squad struck with pinpoint accuracy in the tunnels. Even though the operators who killed them were invisible, the cartel guards had to battle in the dark. Everything was taken care of, Carlos said. Holding the hostages is the ghost crew. Next stop, Charlie, the evacuation site. Laura made her way toward the cathedral in the midst of the night. Performing a final check of his procedure, the surgeon was down there. They hadn't anticipated this, but Victor would have many escape routes and backup plans for every possible situation. For an adversary that utilized their own network of tunnels to their detriment. For a SEAL doing her job in her natural habitat, underwater and underground, where conventional military doctrine was irrelevant. All units are being mobilized by Cooper, Martinez cautioned. The town is being attempted to be locked down. Laura responded, let them, as she checked her weapons. The reason why cartel operations shouldn't be allowed in a town guarded by America's top warriors is going to become clear to them. Unexpected guests were about to arrive at the cathedral, where the surgeon was performing surgery. There was full-scale combat going on beneath Shadow Creek, and its most sinister enemy was drawing near. As Laura stealthily made her way toward the cathedral through the maintenance shaft, gunfire erupted above ground. While the surgeon's security detail dealt with visible dangers, an unseen one was quietly closing in. She whispered status into her tranquility. Ghost 1 made a report on the north side. Cartel reinforcements entering certain areas for assassination. Secure in captivity, Carlos emphasized. Medical personnel are positioned nearby as we proceed through Emergency Tunnel 7. The sound of Martinez's voice was audible. Cooper is completely under the influence. The villages are in disarray, his deputies are dispersed, and they are fighting shadows. In the shadows, Laura beamed. A SEAL's greatest ally was disorder. An access shaft for maintenance provided access to the upper floor of the cathedral. Laura counted heat signatures using her thermal scope. In a circle of 8 elite bodyguards stood the surgeon. Victor is in charge of the security measures. Additional contractors taking defensive stances. This is a compromise, sir. The enormous room resounded with Victor's voice. Several data breaches. Operators with expertise. Smiling, the surgeon put out his cigarette. For how many? Who knows? They are taking advantage of our tunnel network to harm us. Disruption of communications. Surface teams were not contacted. Crucial locations in the structure were charged by Laura. The natural acoustics of the church would only serve to heighten the mayhem she was about to let loose. Has the surface operation progressed, Ghost Team? Martinez has set up roadblocks, and Cooper is caught in the middle. Strongholds of the cartel rendered ineffective. The town was sealed. It was easy to hear the surgeon's refined speech. Victor, this is all too familiar. The same way Guatemala is. Victor said it was impossible. The compound explosion claimed that operator's life. Was that so? Smiling, the surgeon continued. Was it our assumption, though? He pivoted to face the darkness. No, Commander Morrison, I think that's correct. Laura was paralyzed with fear. He was aware. He seemed to have sensed her approach. According to the surgeon, word got out about you before you made a cut. I knew it was impossible, even though Victor said it was. Guatemala was always going to be a problem for us ever as I learned about the female SEAL in Shadow Creek. As Laura responded, her voice resonating from several directions, the difference is. Unlike before, I will not be following your guidelines. She set off the initial charge. Despite its small size, the blast had a catastrophic effect inside the confined area. Laura shifted as the air was thick with the dust of concrete. Tragically, the first guard did not live to brandish his weapon. A knife pierced the second man's neck just as he was about to shoot madly. The surgeon was encircled by a protective ring while Victor yelled out commands in Russian. But they were expecting an attack from the front, so they were staring outward. Within their circle, Laura was all ready. Carry out Operation Kraken, Ghost Squad. Key intersections were sealed off and escape routes were sealed throughout the tunnel system by coordinated explosives. A tomb was made of the cathedral. The surgeon made a somewhat indifferent comment about how impressive it was. Still, it's pointless because you're outnumbered and outgunned. Do I? She spoke in a resonant voice. Parts of the room became dark as another charge went off. Or are we both stuck here? Even though Victor's thermal scope scanned the darkness, Laura had already departed. The killings of 3 other guards were concealed by the commotion above, they met their silent ends. The surgeon yelled out that Guatemala was a commercial operation. Nobody took it personally when your teammates were involved. The situation is not personal either, Laura retorted, appearing momentarily to vanquish 2 additional security officers. So much for justice. Even after he whirled around to shoot at her last location, Victor only hit shadows. As the shadow of death loomed over them, his surviving soldiers huddled closer together, their nerves jangling. Understood, Ghost 1, Commander. Town is secure, detainees have been evacuated. Surface problem contained. Laura informed the surgeon that the patient had lost all hope. Your business, your goods, and your means of egress. What began in Guatemala is now being completed by only the 2 of us. Finally, Victor, the surgeon lost his cool. Retrieve her, but Victor had already given up. Behind him, a shadow materializes with icy accuracy. Nothing came of the last of the guard's desperate fires into the night. Verify that you have all of your exits marked. The source of Laura's voice was both obscure and pervasive. Verify your fallback strategies and your backup plans. I've got 3 full days to get this killing field ready. Gradually, the remaining sentinels collapsed. Laura and the surgeon were the last 2 survivors in the cathedral's dusty, gloomy interior. Interesting, he remarked as he adjusted his tie. Killing you was almost a mistake. It was a mistake on your part to believe you were still in charge, as Laura stepped out of the shadows with her rifle trained on center mass. The streets of Shadow Creek had become silent above them. One last reckoning lingered in the shadows of the cathedral as the underground struggle drew to a close. The last confrontation's opening moves reverberated throughout the cathedral's enormous chamber. Under the illumination of emergency lights, dust whirled up from collapsed tunnels, giving the area an eerie vibe. Standing composedly, the surgeon resembled more of a board chairman than a cartel enforcer due to the concrete powder covering his nice outfit. "You've really come a long way since Guatemala," he said, observing Laura's posture. "With less roughness and more finesse. The best teacher is experience." Laura responded, weapon-trained center mass, when asked about the topic of education. "We should talk about the lessons you've been imparting to the girls in these tunnels." A narrow grin spread across the surgeon's face. "Matters of business, Chief Morrison. Just business. Wherever consumer demand takes the goods is where they will end up. These are not goods for sale. They're people, too, daughters, sisters, and all." He let forth a noncommittal shrug. "You included. In Guatemala, what did you have? Responsibility, integrity. Consider the results for your squad." Unexpectedly, a flashback came to mind, seeing her comrades being brutally murdered and tortured in a compound that was set to detonate. She had miraculously avoided being burned alive after being blown away by the explosion. Update on the ghost team's welfare. Her voice reflected her composure as she kept her attention on the surgeon. "Have neutralized all hostiles, perimeter secured. Cooper and the remaining desert wolves are under Martinez's custody. Medical personnel tending to the rescued hostages." A little motion was made by the surgeon's hand. The shimmer of metal attracted Laura's eye. "Do you still have that ceramic blade on hand? That one that defies metal detectors? You remember?" He appeared content. "I used the same one in Guatemala, yes. Value based on sentiment. Let go of it. Am I going to get shot?" With an unhurried stride, he advanced. "They want me to stay alive in your government. My data is too important to risk losing." Laura's hold is unwavering. The focus in Guatemala wasn't on data. It was all about making a statement and demonstrating the consequences for individuals who meddle with cartel activities. Exactly, a message inscribed in the blood of your teammates. So far, it has been rather success. Here we go again. However, there is an opportunity to compose a fresh message tonight. He was surprisingly swift for his years. Slashing ceramic blades with pinpoint accuracy. Laura saw the pattern and ducked. She had been slain in the identical attack sequence as her team commander. She remarked, "Your technique telegraphs," as she dove under a cut. Excessive influence from the Spetsnaz. Instruction for Victor. A grin faded from the surgeon's face. The subsequent assaults were more rapid and violent. Laura deftly guided him deeper into the room by giving ground. "Everyone is the same." In the pauses between blows, he growled. "Angry, righteous people who think they can alter the course of history. Companies will always discover a method. Remove a single beak. Will 2 more sprout up?" Laura filled in the blanks. "Images of a hydra? Is that so?" By utilizing his momentum, she slammed him into a support column, blocking his next attack. With a clatter, the blade disappeared into the night. She persisted, firmly asserting that this was no myth. "Behold, the truth. That was your operation. Security holes in your network discovered. Your other websites are being shut down by the ghost team right now. The surgeon chortled as his pearly whites were stained with blood. Think Shadow Creek was the be-all and end-all? Our operations number in the dozens. Many government officials were influenced. In the midst of dismantling the cartels, Laura interrupted him. Go look at your phone. A moment ago, all messages were intercepted. All of the intelligence gathered from your operation is currently being sent to law enforcement authorities around the world. An expression of doubt appeared on his face for the very first time. Data security is top priority. Laura flashed a chilly smile while sitting in your SUV's posh laptop, the one Carlos had cloned 3 hours earlier. Messages can be sent by more than just you. Unexpectedly, he drew another sword from his sleeve and lunged. Rachel was prepared. Violence and speed characterized the close-quarters fighting. With his own ceramic blade buried in his shoulder, the surgeon lay gasping as it finished. Laura, as I mentioned before, talked huskily. There are hints in your method. Then spit me out. Finish off your vengeance. We are not seeking vengeance. She restrained him by tying his hands with a zip. Justice is at stake here. You'll spend a great deal of time in a little cell dwelling on the lives you've ruined. She could hear the buzz of her radio. The federal response teams are on their way, Commander. In 10 minutes. Weakly, the surgeon chuckled. The charges will never be sustained. I am friends with too many powerful people. From her vest, Laura took a tiny recorder. Are you referring to the companions you mentioned earlier? The officials who were influenced? All of the other processes? Incredible how much people let their guard down when they believe they're winning. Her radio was keyed. As a ghost squad, launch Operation Clean Sweep. Checked every spot we could find. Talked to the authorities in your area and utilized the surgeon's information. The surgeon noticed that he had transformed as she lifted him up. This would have turned out differently if I had fought this cop in Guatemala. According to Laura, she gained knowledge from her time in Guatemala. Mortality is rapid. Corrective action requires a period. You still have a long way to go. Upon leaving the church, they found themselves in a tunnel that was now under the hands of the ghost crew. Shadow Creek was reviving above ground. Order had been restored by Martinez's deputies. Medical treatment was being provided to the released hostages. In coordination with federal officials, Carlos and Maria were working. Ghost One is closing in on you, Commander. Something else was discovered. The record spanned many years. Regardless of the operation, victim, or corrupt official. I can see it everything. There was a nod from Laura. Verify that the appropriate parties are notified. An exact minutiae. As scholarly interest grew, the surgeon saw his empire crumble. Enduringly intriguing. You didn't merely render the operation inoperable. Our whole infrastructure is now working against us because of you. Laura stated that as federal officials drew near, it is the distinction between us. You treat people like commodities. On my view, they are valuable assets. There are witnesses now for every family you ruined and every individual you exploited. Furthermore, you will never again see freedom thanks to their testimony. Arriving out of the tunnels, Laura witnessed the dawn break over Shadow Creek. Even though the desert air had the flavor of triumph, she was aware that her task was far from done. Additional operations would need to be disabled, networks dismantled, and communities safeguarded. At least for the time being, though, when Laura Morrison witnessed the federal authorities question the surgeon and his remaining men and families being reunited, she felt something she hadn't felt since Guatemala. Calm down. All was well in Shadow Creek. The specters from her past were at last released. Additionally, other cartel operations were on the verge of discovering in the shadows why it was a terrible idea to attack little communities protected by a seal. As Laura continued driving east, she passed Shadow Creek behind her. Unforgiving and harsh, the desert landscape stretched out before her, but in the early morning light, it seemed strangely beautiful. The potential consequences of Mike's offer, an opportunity to confront the cartels on a worldwide scale and put her knowledge to good use, were racing through her thoughts. There was an incoming message that made her phone buzz. It came from Martinez and had a picture of the rescued hostages being given to their relatives as an attachment. Emotions ranging from excitement to relief to tears and hugs served as a sobering reminder of her recent achievements and the stakes that remained. Because Laura needed a moment to collect herself, she pulled off to a remote rest stop. Feeling the sun's warmth on her face, she went out into the desert air. There was still beauty and worth fighting for as a hawk circled lazily in the distance, riding the thermals. The compound in Guatemala, where she had lost her crew, resurfaced in her thoughts. As she dug through the debris, she recalled the smoke, the flames, and the complete sense of powerlessness she had felt. She vowed then and there that she would never do it again, both for her own sake and in honor of her deceased colleagues. She would ensure that the cartels were never again allowed to act impunity. She would ensure that innocent was spared whenever she had the opportunity to do something about it. The ordeal at Shadow Creek had been an opportunity to put that commitment to the test, to show herself that she was still capable of making a positive impact and of being the fierce warrior she had trained to be. And that exam had been easily passed by her. A fresh obstacle had emerged, though, in the form of Mike's offer. In order to take charge of a combined task force, she would have to abandon her whole existence as a SEAL and her position inside the close-knit Special Operations community. This new endeavor would require her undivided attention, and there is no guarantee that it will have a positive outcome. She recalled her father, a lifelong Navy man who had encouraged her to excel in everything that she did. He felt an overwhelming sense of pride when she became the first woman to get the SEAL Trident after completing the rigorous selection process. If he could see her standing at this crossroads right now, what would he say? She allowed the flood of memories wash over Laura as she closed her eyes. A rough but loving voice, her father's, resonated within her. "Dear Laura, you have a talent. A talent for leadership," he told her after a particularly difficult training exercise, "is the ability to make tough decisions. Never be hesitant to utilize it." The choice was decided as she opened her eyes. In response to Mike's offer, she would step down as head of the Joint Task Team and abandon the SEALs. In her battle against the cartels, she would employ all of her knowledge and her gift. They would pay the price for her, for every life they had taken and every family they had broken. One more stop was required of her before continuing. Laura was positioned at the entrance of a modest ranch house outside of Tucson 2 hours subsequently. A flag fluttered in the wind, and the grass was cut beautifully. The property was obviously well kept. Quietly, she gathered herself and rapped on the door. Shortly after, it swung wide to expose a middle-aged woman, her demeanor reserved and her eyes warm. "How may I be of service to you?" As she studied Laura's outfit and demeanor, she inquired. "Mrs. Hernandez," with a firm voice, Laura inquired. "Greetings, I am Commander Laura Morrison. In Guatemala, I was a soldier with Miguel, your son." The woman's pupils enlarged and eventually welled up with tears. With a backward stride, she invited Laura to come inside. Images of Miguel spanning his youth and time in the Navy adorned the walls of the living room. Laura stopped in front of a photo of his SEAL graduation, where he is visibly proud. As she turned to confront Mrs. Hernandez, she whispered that he was a hero. "He prevented my death and innumerable others as well. Tragically, I feel for you." With a nod, Mrs. Hernandez wiped away her tears. "He had an enduring desire to have an impact." Her voice was heavy with emotion as she spoke. "He wanted to be a Navy SEAL and protect the innocent ever since he was a tiny lad. I knew the risks, yet I was still so proud of him." Repressing her own tears, Laura forced herself to swallow. With her voice growing stronger, she added, "I promised Miguel. An oath to stand up for his principles at all times. And I will ensure that pledge is kept at any costs. Grasping a little velvet box, she retrieved it from her pocket. A Navy Cross, the second highest decoration for bravery, was contained within. As she passed it to Mrs. Hernandez, she announced that the president had given his approval last week. As an act of outstanding valor, Miguel bravely ventured into that facility by himself, attracting enemy fire that allowed the rest of us to escape. Our lives were spared by him. With her tears pouring freely, Mrs. Hernandez hugged the medal. Over Laura's shoulder, she murmured a grateful thank you. His sacrifice will not have been in vain because of you. Laura, who was also fighting back tears, nodded. I will never, she vowed. Laura resumed her journey an hour later, carrying the weight of the Navy Cross in her pocket. After making amends with Miguel's relatives, she did everything she could to pay tribute to his memory. The moment had come to look ahead, to the conflicts that lay ahead. Mike had sent her another message, and her phone buzzed once more. Based on what I read, JTF is good to go. Come to Fort Bragg without delay for the first briefing. Her determination growing stronger, Laura grinned glumly. Cartels believed they could do whatever they wanted in the dark and no one would ever catch them. The truth about how mistaken they were was about to hit them. The vehicle sped ahead into the scorching desert heat as she slammed on the gas. With the start of a new chapter came a mission with greater stakes than anything she had ever encountered before. Laura Morrison, however, was prepared. Every second of her life had been dedicated to this moment, to perfecting her abilities and her determination for the battles that truly counted. The cartels had planted the seeds of chaos, and now they would face the most unforgiving enemy they had ever encountered. Justice would be served when Laura Morrison came for them. Laura walked confidently through the corridors of the Joint Task Force headquarters at Fort Bragg, the sound of her footsteps resonating off the polished concrete. The air was electric with activity. Members of every military service rushed past, their expressions determined. An critical mission that could not afford to be bungled hung heavy in the air. In the Situation Room, she discovered Mike slumped over a Central American map. Claimed strongholds of the cartels were highlighted with red pins. Allies were represented by blue pins. As she stepped into the room, he glanced up and grinned glumly. Commander Morrison, he shook her hand firmly in greeting. We have a lot of work ahead of us, so I'm glad you could attend. Examining the map, Laura gave a subtle nod. What should we do first? In the Guatemalan highlands, Mike indicated a group of red pins. We have reliable information of a large-scale smuggling enterprise in this area. Everything from narcotics and guns to people trafficking. It's the center of the cartel's operations. It would be devastating for their network if we can bring it down. Laura crouched down to survey the landscape. Amidst the dense jungle and rocky mountains, any operation would face formidable challenges. But she had experience with worse, and in Guatemala, she wanted to settle a score. When it comes to our assets, what are they? Already beginning to think of a strategy, she inquired. An undercover DEA unit is stationed in the area. With a handoff of a dossier, Mike responded. Months of case building have gone into nothing, they still haven't reached the top brass. We are here to help with that. Laura memorized names and faces as she flipped through the file. A man named Esteban Ramos, who had once served in the Guatemalan Special Forces, became the head of the cartel. A tiny army of devoted gunmen kept him safe, and he was vicious and crafty. Ramos holds the key, she thought as she touched the map. Everything else will fall into place if we can reach him. It won't be easy, but Mike nodded and agreed. He has a strongly fortified and constantly patrolled jungle stronghold. We must slip in undetected, collect intelligence, and wait for our chance to act. The adrenaline surge that always accompanies a new mission returned to Laura with a familiar sense of excitement. The opportunity to put her skills to work for a greater good was her life's work. How about we get started? With an eagerness to hit the field, she inquired. He recognized the sight in her eyes, and Mike grinned. "We'll be on our way in 6 hours. Gather your equipment and choose a side. I'm taking my son hunting." After leaving the situation room, Laura's thoughts were filled with possibilities. The 12 SEALs she had placed her faith in had demonstrated their mettle in the most extreme conditions conceivable. More than simply force is needed for this operation, though. Slyness, flexibility, and a desire to stay out of sight would be necessary. Johnson, her Shadow Creek Rock and former PJ, crossed her mind. His ability to improvise allowed him to transform obstacles into possibilities. Additionally, there was Martinez, the deputy who had gone to great lengths to aid in the defeat of the Desert Wolves. Her extensive knowledge of cartel tactics and her connections in the area might be very useful. Carefully organizing her team, Laura made her calls. Everyone on the team contributed something special, whether it was shooting accuracy, linguistic abilities, or technological knowledge. Their exceptional abilities had been carefully selected for a task that would push them to their maximum potential. Laura watched her squad load stuff into a waiting C-130 as the sun fell over Fort Bragg from the tarmac. With the awareness that they were about to venture into the depths of darkness, the air was thick with anticipation. Instead of fear, Laura felt a strong feeling of purpose and resolve. She had vowed to Miguel and to all those who had fallen prey to the cartel's violence. Until that vow was kept, until darkness was cast out and light of fairness emerged, she would not stop fighting. As the prop wash whipped her hair about her face, the engines of the C-130 roared to life. With her fellow fighters crammed into her seat, Laura ascended onto the vessel. They came from all around the nation and represented every social and economic stratum. A mutual dedication to a cause bigger than themselves, nonetheless, brought them together. Laura closed her eyes as the jet ascended into the night sky, picturing the faces of the people she battled for. The innocent people who fell prey to the avarice and brutality of the cartels, the bereaved relatives of those who perished in battle, and the freed prisoners of Shadow Creek. They were the driving force behind her will to conquer any obstacle. Laura was determined to fight for her squad to the very end as the C-130 veered south, bringing them towards an unknown destiny. The air was heavy with the stench of decaying plants and standing water, and the jungle was gloomy and stifling. With her senses heightened for any indication of danger, Laura guided her crew into the dense vegetation. For 3 days, they had scouted the cartel's base and gathered intelligence. A large number of armed guards swarmed the enormous compound. The concrete bunker encircled by razor wire and landmines served as Ramos's hiding place in the center complex. Nevertheless, Laura possessed a strategy that depended on cunning and accuracy instead of sheer aggression. She found a drainage tube that went straight into the compound's core, which was a hole in the cartel's fortifications. Although it was a daring endeavor, it was their only hope of reaching Ramos unnoticed. Laura gave the signal for her crew to remain in position as they drew near the entrance of the tunnel. With her weapon drawn, she silently advanced, keeping an eye out for any indication of motion. Out of nowhere, a branch broke off behind her. With her finger still on the trigger, Laura whirled around and stooped down. Unfortunately, the only one was Johnson, and he was looking quite worried. He said something about having company and gestured towards the south. "Hey there, patrol. I'm coming your way." Laura muttered an expletive. Detection would be disastrous at this moment. She disappeared into the jungle's darkness after signaling her squad to retreat. With their pulses racing, they watched as the patrol approached. 6 heavily armed men strutted about with the carefree haughtiness of individuals who thought they could conquer the world. With her finger poised over the trigger, Laura held her breath. The patrol would need to move quickly to eliminate them if they were detected before they could sound the alarm. But the patrol went on their way, completely unaware of the threat that was hiding in the darkness. Laura silently breathed a sigh of relief and gave the signal for her crew to resume their progress. They silently made it to the tunnel's opening and disappeared inside. Dampness clung to the walls, and the air was thick with mustiness. Laura, whose attention was entirely on the work at hand, hardly noticed. They made rapid, stealthy progress through the maze of tunnels. Laura had committed the layout to memory with the help of the DEA team's intelligence. Both the way there and what to do once there were crystal clear to her. Laura could make the voices reverberating off the concrete walls as they drew near the center chamber. As she crept forward to investigate, she indicated for her crew to remain in position. She peered through a gap in the wall and saw Ramos encircled by his top lieutenants. Anger and irritation were evident in their raised voices as they argued. A man with a furrowed brow expressed his fear that American forces were drawing near. The time has come to transfer the product. With a composed and self-assured smile, Ramos shook his head. No, he stated with a gentle but firm tone. We refuse to back down, we fight back, and we prove to them that we are not scared. A shiver went down Laura's spine. There was no cartel thug on par with Ramos. He was a guy of unwavering faith who would do whatever it took to safeguard his kingdom. However, she couldn't keep thinking about it. Lieutenants were dispersing to their respective postings as the meeting came to a close. Time was of the essence. Laura gave the all-clear signal, and her squad charged into the room brandishing their weapons. The whole thing caught Ramos and his men off guard, and they were horrified and shocked. With her voice resonating off the walls, Laura yelled out to the federal authorities. Lie down and put your weapons down. A brief moment passed when Ramos appeared likely to obey. Nevertheless, he subsequently went for his rifle in an act of blasphemous defiance. Laura outpaced her. Ramos was hit right in the chest by the round she fired. As his empire crumbled around him, he collapsed, his eyes wide with shock. The remaining cartel members surrendered by laying down their firearms. Securing the inmates and collecting evidence, Laura and her crew advanced. That was it. We captured the stronghold and took the leadership of the cartels into jail. This, though, was just the beginning, as Laura was well aware. Standing over Ramos's lifeless body, she experienced a chilling sensation of gratification. She had fulfilled her vow to Miguel and all those who had suffered at the hands of the cartels. There would be more fights to come, more darkness to dispel, but it was something she was also aware of. It was still early in the conflict. Laura Morrison, ever prepared to spearhead the charge into the shadows, would be there as well. The atmosphere in the Fort Bragg debriefing room was heavy with expectation and stress as it was packed with people. With a mix of weary and grimly satisfied expressions on their faces, Laura sat at the head of the table, surrounded by her crew. Behind her, a row of displays showed footage from the raid, the jungle compound, the drainage tunnel, and Ramos's terrified expression as Laura's bullet hit its target. Mike addressed the gathered crew from his vantage point at the front of the room, his countenance betraying his seriousness. He spoke with an air of proud superiority about what you accomplished in Guatemala. Your strike on the cartels will reverberate around the world. Nothing they do will be able to evade your scrutiny. You have made it clear that they have nowhere to run. With a nod, Laura expressed her intense joy. Nonetheless, she was well aware that the task was far from finished. Her voice exuding confidence, she stated that Ramos was only the start. Like a hydra, the cartels will regrow once you cut off one of their heads. Never let up on the pressure, we must strike them where it hurts. After receiving Mike's nod, a fresh set of photos appeared on the screens. The cartels are reorganizing and moving their activities to other areas, according to our intelligence. Mexico, Colombia, and Venezuela are home to a number of valuable targets that we have located. Laura knelt down and studied the pictures carefully. Every one of them was a fresh threat, a chance to fight back against evil. As her thoughts raced with potential solutions, she proclaimed that we must act swiftly. Following Guatemala, the cartels will be extremely vigilant. People will be waiting for us. A twinkle of mischief sparkled in Mike's eyes as he grinned. I say we surprise them with something. Laura and her team launched a barrage of daring operations against the cartels over the course of the following few weeks. They struck drug labs in Mexico's mountains, Colombian jungles, and Venezuelan slums, as well as weapons depots and human trafficking rings. The extraordinary courage and commitment of Laura's team was on full display during each procedure, which was a work of art. Their unquenchable need for justice and their righteous wrath drove them to work non-stop, exhausting themselves and going above and beyond. However, the cartels refused to give up easily. They reacted violently to every strike, unleashing a barrage of weapons on Laura and her squad. There were instances when it appeared like all might be lost, as well as near calls and narrow escapes. An inspiration to her teammates, Laura kept her head down and her resolve strong through thick and thin. She was the one who always took the lead, being the first one in and the last one out. Her passionate loyalty to her fellow soldiers and her unfaltering focus on the task motivated everyone around her. And the tide did start to turn, albeit slowly. Laura and her team were tenacious in their pursuit of the cartels, and their once powerful empires were beginning to crumble. As the night grew lighter, the path to justice became clear. However, the last straw came from an unforeseen source. A knock at the door at Fort Bragg interrupted Laura while she was engrossed in her quarters, analyzing intelligence reports and plotting her next operation. Upon opening it, she discovered Mike standing there, his expression somber. "We need to talk," he remarked in a quiet, urgent voice. With a palpable feeling of dread, Laura accompanied him to the situation room. It was as if the floor had collapsed beneath her when she beheld the pictures projected upon the screens. It was at Shadow Creek, a tiny desert village, that she had initially faced up against the cartels in the United States. At this point, though, complete destruction lay in wait. Bodies littered the streets as flames engulfed the town, reducing structures to ruins. At the very heart of it all was a lone guy, his twisted face betraying his animosity and fury. She had brought down the cartel chief in Shadow Creek, the surgeon, in this case. However, he had returned at last, and he had accompanied himself with the cartel's complete power. With a tense voice betraying his wrath, Mike stated that he fled from custody 1 week prior. "We believe this has been in the works for some time, his last act of vengeance against the woman who deposed him." With a growing icy rage and an iron will, Laura resolved to put a stop to this once and for all. She proclaimed in a steely voice that we must put an end to him. He must be held accountable for his actions. The last showdown took place deep within Shadow Creek, in the same caverns and tunnels where Laura had initially engaged the cartels. A cruel and savage affair, it was a true test of courage, talent, and unwavering resolve. With an indomitable will to do what is right and an unwavering dedication to justice, Laura and her crew battled like hellions. The air was heavy with smoke and the smell of death as they engaged in a succession of terrible gunfights with the cartel men. An inspiration to her teammates, Laura kept her head down and her resolve strong through thick and thin. She was the one who always took the lead, being the first one in and the last one out. Her passionate loyalty to her fellow soldiers and her unfaltering focus on the task motivated everyone around her. A vicious hand-to-hand combat in the tunnel's depths was the last straw that finally brought Laura and the physician face to face. They engaged in a brutal duel, exchanging blows and gunfire as they were both hell-bent on remaining victorious. Laura, though, came out on top in the end, her eyes burning with an unwavering resolve as she closed her fist around the surgeon's throat. With a steely voice, she declared that it was over. "It's over for you." Anger and animosity contorted the surgeon's face as he raised an angry eyebrow toward her. "Does this mean we're done?" Snarling was his sound of choice. "You believe you've triumphed? Cartels will never give up or give in. No matter what happens, someone else will step in to replace me." A tiny grimace danced over Laura's lips as she shook her head in disagreement. "No," she said with an air of self-assurance. "Since our conflict will continue indefinitely, there will be none. We will pursue you relentlessly until we find you, no matter where you hide. Until the darkness is dispelled and the light of justice is revealed, we shall not stop fighting." Laura finally put an end to the surgeon's terror with a final, conclusive strike. With her troops by her side, she emerged from the tunnels knowing that the battle was far from done. No matter how hard you tried, there would always be another enemy to vanquish. Like a hydra, the cartels never died and were continuously looking for new ways to poison people all across the globe. However, Laura Morrison would always be there to greet them. For all who battled at her side, she would be an inspiration as she led the charge into the night. Because she fought for what was right, protected the innocent, and spoke up for justice. No matter how long it took, she would not stop fighting until evil was overcome. Laura stood amid the town's ruins as the sun fell over Shadow Creek, her gaze locked toward the horizon. Accompanying her, her colleagues were occupied with treating casualties, securing detainees, and collecting evidence. Unfortunately, Laura was already planning for the next mission and conflict in her brain. She was well aware that the drug lords would reorganize and discover other vectors for their deadly poison. Still, she was confident that she would be available at all times to greet them. For all who battled at her side, she would be an inspiration as she led the charge into the night. Because she fought for what was right, protected the innocent, and spoke up for justice. No matter how long it took, she would not stop fighting until evil was overcome. With a little, glum smile playing on the edges of her mouth, Laura looked to her colleagues as the final light dwindled from the sky. "Let's get to work," she remarked with an air of confidence. "A mountain of labor awaits us. 2 more noteworthy tales will be shown to you shortly. You won't want to miss out on these if this one works. Take a look at them with a simple click."
Disclaimer. This channel stands against all forms of intolerance, discrimination, racism, and violations of human rights. The stories shared here are original creations, developed to encourage reflection, understanding, and constructive dialogue. All content is produced with a commitment to respecting diversity and honoring human dignity.